Good evening and welcome to Quorum. This is our 34th season of providing you a direct link to your state legislators. I'm Stephen Caranda. Superintendents across Mississippi are searching for ways to save money and save their school districts from further budget cuts. Last month, because of the slowing economy, Governor Haley Barbour cut around $76 million from the Adequate Education Program. This program is a complex funding formula for each of the state's 152 school districts. The millions of dollars in budget cuts could mean some schools will run out of money before the end of the fiscal year. Tonight, leaders of the Senate and House Education Committees will discuss their strategies for funding K-12 education. We welcome to the program Senator Videt Carmichael, who's chairman of the Education Committee. He's serving his 9th year as a lawmaker. Senator Carmichael is from Meridian and represents District 33, which includes Clark and Lauderdale counties. Also with us is Senator Gray Tollison. Senator Tollison is vice chairman of the Education Committee. He's from Oxford and represents District 9 in Lafayette, Tallahatchie, and Yalobusha counties. Senator Tollison is serving his 13th year in the legislature. From the House, we have Representative Cecil Brown, chairman of the House Education Committee. Representative Brown is from Jackson and represents District 66 in Hinds County. He's serving his 9th year in the legislature. And Representative Kelvin Buck, serving his 5th year in the legislature. He's a member of the House Education Committee. Representative Buck is from Holly Springs, representing District 5 in Benton and Marshall counties. To all of you, welcome to Quorum. Thanks for coming in tonight.
Thank you. Thank you.
For 34 years, your phone calls have been an important part of the program. The toll-free number from anywhere in Mississippi is 1-877-405-5247. That's 1-877-405-5247. You may begin calling us with your questions for our guests. For those of you on the internet, you can email your questions to quorum@mpbonline.org. Also, tonight's Quorum program is being simulcast on MPB radio. I'd like to start with just a little bit of an issue that's going on right now. 4 school districts are facing severe budget cuts and may have to be taken over by the state. For you two in the House, what are members of the House doing for these 4 school districts?
Well, actually, we passed an amendment to a bill today that would allow those school districts to borrow money from the state treasury to fund their cash flow problems. That's something the State Department of Education had asked us to do, and we passed it out unanimously out of the House Committee today. It'll go to the floor within the next few days, and we'll take it up next week. So that's really the mechanism that's already in place to allow those school districts to borrow money.
And just to note, these districts are Indianola, Kemper County, Tate County, and Noxubee County. Recently, Senator Carmichael, the Senate started dealing with this issue, didn't they?
Yes, probably been a week ago, something like that.
What are you pursuing right now?
Well, like Chairman Brown said, we have passed something out of the Senate committees over there, and ours is a little bit different, and I don't know which one would be the better right now. Excuse me. We're taking assuming stimulus money would be there, and if not, we'd have to go another route to do that, to give them up to the $3 million that they need right now.
And if I'm understanding correctly, this would be a loan to the schools, and would they be then taken over by the state?
Well, my understanding is that a couple of the districts of the 4 that you talked about probably have to be taken over. There's 2 that we're not real sure of. The State Department would have to make that decision, the State Board of Education.
And Senator Tollison, this may not be your specific area of expertise, but in some of these districts, what does it seem like are some of the problems that might have got them in this situation?
Well, first you got to look at what the governor did. He cut $76 million from the education budget, and that didn't necessarily have to be done. And that's something, you know, the legislature, the House did pass a bill to restore that money. And if we restored that money, we wouldn't have that problem with some of these school districts. And it's not just those 4. There are other school districts that are having problems. It's as many as 20. It's just not to the amount of dollars. Those that you're working with there are about $1 million+ plus. The governor could have used $50 million from the rainy day fund and restored this money. We also have this federal stimulus package coming, the money from that, and I understand the governor said at a press conference today that he would use that money to restore and fully restore the money that he cut from the MAEP. So, but the problem is this: we told these school districts we're cutting you, so when teachers retire, they're not rehiring them, and so we've kind of disrupted them providing an education to the students when that didn't have to be done. And I regret it did happen, but unfortunately the legislature hadn't followed through with what the House did in restoring the funding. So here we are, and there's some schools in serious financial problems that we have to do something about now through the end of June 30th. And so hopefully we can at least do that, but there are other school districts that are having some problems as well.
Now, according to also to the State Department of Education, these 4 districts that you mentioned, the cuts were not the reason that they're in this situation right now. There's some mismanagement of funds. Now, the cuts hurt. I agree with what Senator Tollison said, but that's not the reason that they're in financial trouble right now.
Representative Brown, would you agree with that there was mismanagement in these districts?
Well, we haven't been out there to examine the school districts. We don't know the answer to that, and the State Department's out in each one of these districts right now with a financial advisor and a couple of them looking at the situation. There's mismanagement's a strong term. You have to look at it and say, maybe they don't have enough money to meet their obligations. Maybe they're overhired. Is that mismanagement? I don't know. The cuts hurt. Certainly, if I were given a budget and had to follow that budget and knew exactly how much revenue I was going to get, then I would work within that budget. But you got to remember, we're in an economic crisis right now, and 40% of the money that goes to school districts comes from local ad valorem taxes. If people don't pay their ad valorem taxes because their houses are being foreclosed on, then the local revenue goes down. So we've got a confluence of problems right here in the school districts, and we just need to work with it. We're going to do that. If there are problems with mismanagement, we'll find that out pretty quickly, and we'll do whatever we've got to do to take care of that.
Now, I would add to that while you might want to focus on the 4 districts that are in deficit kind of situations, you still have to look at the fact that, as the senator has indicated, that the cuts that were put in place by the governor have had such an adverse effect, whether you're at a deficit standing or not. I mean, it's just one of those things where school districts are really depending on what we call adequate funding, which doesn't mean that we are giving an overabundance of money. We're just trying to make a minimum standard in terms of what the state offers. And so with that in mind, when you take into consideration the cuts that the governor has done and some of the other problems that they'll have in terms of revenue at the local district level, then you're really looking at some other districts that are going to be facing some problems as well that are very, very significant.
For you two in the House, what have House members been pursuing? If I'm remembering correctly, there was a $1 cigarette tax increase passed. Was some of that earmarked towards education? Is that right?
Well, that money was going towards general fund operations, which would give us money to, use in whatever area, whether it be education or Medicaid or what have you. But yes, certainly that was one of the efforts that we took an initiative on to try to at least lessen the impact of these cuts that the governor has imposed.
Right now, we're pursuing the stimulus money. The cigarette tax is important. All these issues are important. We don't have enough information about the stimulus package. Some of this is in the governor's hands. A substantial amount of the stimulus money that goes to education is going to come through the governor's office, and he's got to make the decision about how he wants to allocate that money, and we don't have the answers yet. That's not blaming the governor. I don't think he has the answers yet. It's just a little bit early in the process. We're a week, 10 days into the stimulus package, and we've got a long way to go. So we're working hard on it. We've spent enormous amounts of time trying to figure out what's going on with stimulus, talking to our congressional delegation, having our staff look at it. We're working on that. And as Chairman Buck has said, we have passed the cigarette tax, and we're hopeful that that will help shore up the general fund so there'll be additional money for education.
I think we're all excited about the stimulus money and the restoring of the cuts, the MAP, to all the school districts, because it's very important that we do. As we said, it's adequate, but we need to look too that our local districts they need to make sure that they're spending the money wisely. But it is a minimum, and we want to make sure those cuts are restored. And I think that's going to happen, and that makes me feel better about the situation.
So what are you and other senators doing now then? Are you just waiting for this to develop a little bit more, or looking at the legislation to figure out how to get these dollars to the schools?
Well, I think Senator Tollison just made the statement that the governor made an announcement today to restore the cuts using stimulus, if I understand
That's
what
my
he said.
understanding.
And mine too. So we're going to have a House bill coming over now with our education budget in it. And Chairman Brown and I hadn't talked about it in detail at all yet, but that's the beginning. It's already started.
The process is this. The governor cannot restore the cuts without legislative action. He doesn't have the authority to appropriate money. He has met with House leadership, and I assume he's met with Senate leadership to talk about the fact he wants to restore the cuts using stimulus money. We've got to pass a bill, as I understand it, to allow him to do that, and we will act expeditiously to get that done as soon as we get some rules on how the money can be spent. But you got to understand that Congress passed a bare bones legislation. There's some, you've got to look at what the regulations are going to be. Like, got to look at the committee reports on the legislation. It's just going to take a few days to sort all that out and figure exactly how the money comes down. But as soon as we have those answers, which I hope in the next 3 or 4 days, we will pass a bill, I feel sure, to allow him to restore the cuts and get that out to the districts. The main thing we need to do now is reassure the districts that money is going to be there, because they're already having to make cuts.
Here's the deal with that, though. We have disrupted the services to our students across this state by the cuts. We've got $200 or $300 million in a rainy day fund that we can use right now. That's not our money. That's the taxpayers' money, and we should be giving that money today. And we should have been doing it a month ago, because we have disrupted the services. As I said, school districts are having to slash, and they're not hiring teachers or retiring, and it is causing a problem. And we could take that money from the rainy day, restore it. They keep providing the services like they should, but the train has stopped right now, and now we're going to have to start it back up with the federal money. When it comes down, I don't know. We don't know. I mean, it may be May, June. It may be after school's out. So, and there are a lot of questions about it.
Representative Buck.
Well, and even at that, I mean, you think about the stimulus money. That's just a short-term solution. I mean, it'll get us through maybe this year and maybe another year. But the reality is, when we talk about the funding, we may have some other lean years that may not be met with the same kind of aggression when it comes to Washington, D.C. providing a stimulus package. But we still have to look at the way that we're funding this process and try to make sure that even when we have a situation where we're using rainy day money, and we have the option of using rainy day money, that money, when the schools are suffering in the way they are now, it's raining as far as I'm concerned, and those funds ought to be available to use not only this year, the years, and the years that are coming up as well. I just think it's one of those things that we really have to look at, a real steady flow of funding for these school districts, and that requires some revenue, and stimulus won't always be there to make that happen.
They're both right. We have passed in the House a rainy day fund to restore the cuts. We could do that. The Senate could do that, and then we could work with the stimulus package as the money comes in. And Senator Tollison's exactly right. And Representative Buck, we don't know when the money's coming down. The Medicaid money's coming down pretty fast. The education money, we just don't know about that at this point.
But at the same time, we don't want to. These will always be recurring expenses, right? Whether it's rainy day funds or whether it's stimulus money. We know we'll have to restore rainy day fund to keep it for another rainy day, so to speak. Mm-hmm. Again, I'm excited that we have some money that we think we'll be able to use with stimulus. Again, when we're planning budgets for future years, we've got to make sure that we have reoccurring money to come in with those reoccurring expenses best we can.
Let's bring a caller into this. Marie from Ashland, go ahead with your question.
Yes. Do you think that the House plan or the Senate plan will be passed on the tax on tobacco?
Thank you for that call, Marie. I'll go to you two in the House first. Just again, could you recap briefly what the House has passed and what you're hoping will happen with it?
You go ahead.
Well, we passed an increase in cigarette tax to $1 a pack, and the money goes to the general fund. And from there, it can be allocated to education or health care or wherever that might go. And a lot of those decisions will be based on what happens with stimulus money and other monies. There's some other bills out there. We passed a Medicaid funding bill that would tax hospitals for $45 million, about half what the governor's asked for. All those bills are in play right now. But the answer to her question is I think there will be a cigarette tax bill passed. Hopefully, both sides will pass something. Now, whether we can agree in conference on how the money is going to be spent or exactly where the level is, I don't know the answer to that at this point.
And Senator Carmichael, what he was just talking about is a little bit different from what the Senate has passed. What are they looking at right now?
Well, again, there's never any legislation that's passed that's exactly the same from both ends of the building down there, rarely ever. So whatever comes out of the cigarette tax will be a conference report that both sides will agree upon. And that's just the normal way that things operate. And it's a good way, I think. It's often said you don't really want to see laws made, but that's a part of the process. Now, Senator Tollison serves on the Finance Committee. He could fill you in a little better.
Yeah,
Senator Tollison, was it a 49-cent
49
increase?
cents, and it is in conference right now. We've named conferees, and so the House is at $1. We're at 49 cents. You'd hope the middle ground would be 75 cents. I suspect it'll be maybe 60 cents. Now, the issue about earmarking money, I'm of the opinion you just need to put it in the general fund and not earmark it for education or Medicaid. I know some people believe that, but if you're giving it to the general fund, you will be giving it to education and Medicaid. So I wish that we'd also look at some other taxes on other products other than just the cigarettes, but I don't know what will happen and what will come out of conference. But I hope somewhere between 60 and 75 cents. So we need the revenue right now, and we won't see this particular tax probably in another 20 years. So we always look at the contiguous states and what their cigarette taxes are to kind of determine what ours is. Well, Arkansas last week, I think, raised theirs 58 cents. So, you know, it's a moving target, and we certainly, I hope that the conferees would look at that in making their final decision as to what the final cigarette tax will be.
One of the problems we have is the use of the money. I mean, we've got these bills floating around out there, some of which have been passed, I think, in the Senate, which reduce local property taxes, either through car tags or the inventory tax. It's a tax swap that some members have talked about that they favor. The problem with that is it's taking money out of the general fund, and as we've all said, the stimulus money is short-term money. It'll be here for 2 or 3 years, and then it's gone. And if we keep reducing the amount of money that goes into the general fund and funneling it out, if you will, to local governments, we're going to find ourselves back 2.5, 3 years from now in exactly the same situation we're in now, where we've got all these recurring expenses that we funded with one-time money, and we don't have any way to fund them. So I'm very concerned about that.
We've got actually a question here that touches on the money issue from Twitter, and I'd just like to add, for those of you on Twitter, you can follow MPB on Twitter by going to our website, mpbonline.org. The question is from Andy Chapman. Why do we assume that more money makes better educated kids? Are there facts to back that up? I guess I'll throw that to you, Senator Carmichael, first.
Well, I don't know that we assume that more money makes better educated kids. I think more money makes facilities and the ability to offer what we do for our children better in a lot of ways, whether it be in the classroom or the facility, the building itself that they're going to, the plant. So I don't necessarily assume that more money makes better education. I think better quality teachers, better quality leadership, better quality or community input, and those factors make better educated kids.
And Representative Brown and Representative Buck, how does the funding issue really play into this for you two?
Well, you know, resources matter. And regardless of what you say, I don't think you just throw resources to try to solve all the problems, but resources matter. There are districts that have far less in terms of local revenue than other districts. And one of the whole purposes of the Mississippi Adequate Education Act is to try to balance that out, to try to make sure that districts that are poor in terms of revenue have a pretty good balance, at least a minimum level of funding. And so when we talk about the issue of does money matter, or do we think that money will solve the problem? No, we don't. But we do know that when you can provide the kind of educational experiences and curriculum, it takes money to do that, to maintain solid teachers, to maintain solid curriculums, to bring in the kind of technology and computers that other districts might have at their disposal. Resources matter. And so as a legislature, I think it's important that we try to ensure that the funding, whether it be one of the more poor districts as well as some of these more affluent districts, that we have the funding available and that every child in the state of Mississippi has an adequate, at least adequate education.
Let's bring another call into this. Phyllis, go ahead with your question. Can you hear me, Phyllis? Go ahead.
Sir, okay, I'm calling from Kemper County, and we are one of the schools that's going to be taken over by the state, and I want to know, problems have been reported for years, 6, 7 years back, to the board and to the county superintendents, last superintendent, and nothing ever got done. So who monitors the people that's supposed to be taking care of those schools? Why did it get so far behind?
I think we've got it, Phyllis. Phyllis is wondering who watches over these schools. Representative Brown, who has the oversight on these districts?
Well, we have a rating scale. We have an accreditation standard. Here's the deal, though. In Mississippi and really in every state, you've got a local school board, you've got a local superintendent. In many instances, they're elected. In some instances, they're appointed. but they have control, they have governance over the local schools. And if the community does not get involved in local schools and hold them accountable, it's very hard for somebody here in Jackson to hold those folks accountable. We can do testing, and everybody publishes the test results. We can look at graduation rates. We can look at dropout rates. But under our current law, until it gets into an emergency situation like it is in Kemper County right now and some other places, the State Board of Education and the governor's office can't do anything. That's the reason we passed the Children First bill, Senator Carmichael. We've got a bill right now that will allow us to come in at an earlier stage when you've got a district that's in difficulty and take some action to either help that district and force them to make some changes or take them over at a much earlier stage. But under the law we have right now, we can't help the patient until the patient's critical, and many times that's too late.
I think and Chairman Brown's exactly correct. The piece of legislation we have in both houses right now, the Children's First Act, has a part of that, the financial aspect with the audits and the community involvement, those kinds of things that really puts the local people more in charge, and also the State Department gives them a little more authority to go in and do what they feel like needs to be done in school districts, and you need, whether it's financial or whether it's academic or both.
And let's just talk about that bill a little bit. It recently passed in the Senate. Would it be that, if I'm remembering correctly, the state could take over a school if it were underperforming for 2 consecutive years? Does that sound right?
Well, the term we're working with now are failing school districts. You know, they're coming up with new strategies, or not strategies, but levels of performance. And if it falls in the category for that length of time, that is one of the possibilities that could happen, that the State Department could take them over. But it has to be declared a state of emergency by the State Board of Education, and then the governor would have to ask for it or approve it.
And under this bill, I think you just mentioned this, finances would be taken into consideration as one of those.
No doubt. It's the whole operation of the school itself, or the school district, that what we're basically talking about, not just a school, but a school district.
And Representative Brown, for these schools that are taken over by the state, what kind of success do we usually see from them? How long are they under these conservatorships?
Well, what we've seen based on the reports we get is while they're under conservatorship and for a short period thereafter, they've been successful. But in many instances, what happens is if you leave the same leadership in place and the State Board of Education, the State Department leave, and they go right back to being unsuccessful. We've had some instances of that. So what we've done in this bill is we've given the State Board of Education the authority to remove the leadership, to remove the superintendent, to remove the Board of Education, the local boards, and completely take the district over, and they can actually keep them under conservatorship. Well, they can do this under current law, but they can keep them under conservatorship for a lengthy period of time if they need to be. And you got to remember the title of this act. It's called the Children First Act, and the whole premise of this was based on a committee we had, a task force that Senator Carmichael and I chaired over the summer and fall. It looked at the issue, what's best for kids, and get the adults out of the equation, and let's get the kids primary. And that's what this is about. It's making school districts accountable for the performance of the children, for making sure that kids have the opportunity, as Representative Buck has said, to get an adequate education.
The only thing I would add to that is the caller's question was who's going to be held accountable? Who's going to be held responsible for failing school districts? Who's going to be responsible for children that don't have a school that is ready to prepare them? Who's going to be held responsible? And what the legislature has done is said we're going to take a leading role in this from the standpoint that at the state level we're going to hold the people that are responsible for the leadership in those areas, and leadership matters. This is something that the superintendent of education has said over and over again. Leadership matters, and if we can implement the kind of policies that will hold those leaders accountable, as we think we've been able to achieve with these Children's First Acts, both in the Senate and the House, I think we'll be able to answer the caller's question, who's accountable, and then hold them accountable and make the changes necessary to move the district or the school in another direction.
And what really pleases me about this, too, Representative Buck, you're exactly right. And the children first, as Cecil, Chairman Brown said, the leadership is the number one thing. Mm-hmm. And if the leadership, for whatever reasons, is not there like it should be, and my belief is it should be like a home rule situation. This is your school district, your community. But if you're not doing the leadership and it passes on down from that, what these children need, well, I think it's our responsibility as the legislature and the state to make sure that those children are receiving the kind of education that they deserve.
Let's bring another caller into this from Jackson. I hope I've got the name right. Is it Carl from Jackson?
Actually, this is Paul from Jackson.
Paul from Jackson. Go ahead with your question.
Thank you for taking my call. My call is directed toward mainly Cecil Brown here. During President Obama's speech last night, he pushed charter schools, and I think the biggest obstacle for our children learning is discipline problems. Charter schools would go a long way to fix that in this state. Why does our state legislature refuse to take this issue up? I'll hang up and listen. Thank you.
Thank you for the call, Paul. Representative Brown, that was aimed towards you. Go ahead.
Well, the state legislature has not refused to take it up. In fact, the Senate has passed out a charter school bill. On the House side, I have authored a charter school bill for 9 years in a row, and it's never gotten out of subcommittee. It's never gotten to the full committee. There are a lot of misunderstandings about exactly what charter schools are. Charter schools don't necessarily solve a discipline problem. They don't necessarily solve any problem, but they can solve a lot of problems. It depends on the charter school. It depends on the charter. Depends on the leadership. Depends on the students in the system. Charter schools are nothing more than another form of public schools. The charter is a contract between either a local school district and a group that runs the school, or between the State Board of Education and a group that runs the school, and it sort of puts the governance of the school into the hands of either a private organization or a 501c3 charitable organization or a church organization, somebody outside the mainstream of the public education system, the normal system. Charter schools work in many instances. In some instances, they've been total failures. The charter school bill in the House is in a subcommittee, and the subcommittee chairman has decided to not bring out a charter school bill. She has decided, she's been the subcommittee chairperson for 2 years in a row, and she's decided she does not, at this point in time, want to bring out any subcommittee, any charter school bill, and I'm the chairman. I made the decision to assign those bills to her, and I'm going to honor her decision. There are just as many people who are opposed to charter schools in Mississippi as there are people who are in favor of charter schools. Representative Buck and I attended a meeting yesterday of about 40 people, and I would say, other than maybe the two of us, everybody in the room, and these are leaders across the state of Mississippi, everybody in the room was opposed to charter schools. So when you're on one side of an argument, it's easy to believe I've got the only side of the argument, but then when you listen to the other side, you say, well, maybe they've got a side to the argument too. So, Representative Buck?
Well, and think about this. We've just spent a few moments here talking about the cuts in education and how short we are as it relates to funding for education, and how difficult it would be to raise revenue through some kind of a tax or some other measure to fund education. Well, if you begin, and we got 152 school districts right now, public school districts. The math doesn't add up as far as I'm concerned when it comes to being able to provide another set of school systems, being charter schools. Now, I'm open to the discussion and debate, but this will be a local issue, I believe. I think when you talk about charter schools, I think the locals will have a whole lot to do and say about what will be acceptable as it relates to charter schools, and it just, it is not something I don't think we can mandate at the state level.
Let me say something about the president's position on this too. The president comes from Chicago. They got 20 charter schools in Chicago. I've been to Chicago. I've visited those schools up there. Chicago is a very different area than Mississippi. In Chicago, people go to neighborhood schools. They can walk to schools. They don't have transportation issues like we have in the state of Mississippi. They have school choice up there. You can go to any school you want to in the city. You can walk as far as you want to go. That's they don't have a deficit of teachers up there. We have a shortage of almost 2,500 teachers in the state of Mississippi. We don't have enough teachers to go around now. In Chicago, they've got more teachers than they need. Their vacancy rate is 0. Somebody leaves, they've immediately got a qualified teacher because they pay so much more up there. Somebody else called about money. You know what the starting salary is for a teacher in Chicago? $60,000 a year. Our starting salary is, what, $32,000 or something like that? I mean, it's a very different situation where the President of the United States comes from than rural Mississippi. And we can't legislate based on what happens in Chicago. I mean, I love the president. I think he's great, and I voted for him, and I'd vote for him again. But on this issue, we've got to listen to a lot of voices from rural Mississippi as well as listen to the President of the United States.
And I'm sure the Senate's listening to some of those voices, too. What have you been
We are,
in the Senate?
and I know Senator Tollison wants to speak on this, so I'll be brief. I think the charter school gives us another tool, and I think Representative Buck's correct. This is a local issue, but until we pass a charter school bill, we're not giving the locals a chance to do it. And I'm not throwing stones. Y'all know that on the other side. There's so many important things that we need to be doing in education, and anything we can do to help. If there's a group in that community who thinks the charter, through the process that we passed in the Senate, would be able to have a charter school, again, it's just another tool that they could use, because we want to keep the kids out front, and I try to keep thinking that. And I'm like most people. Many times I get caught up in rhetoric and other things, and forget about why we're here and what we're doing, especially as teachers in school settings. When you go look at those babies, and when I say babies, the kids in school, whether they're kindergarten through seniors in high school, they got a life ahead of them, and it's up to us to do whatever we can to make sure that they have a quality of life, and you got to have a basic education to even go from there. And to me, charters is just another way that it may help this group of kids there. And I'm going to let
Senator Tollison go ahead.
Well, I mean, I was on follow-up. I mean, not only is the president for charter schools, but the U.S. new Secretary of Education was the superintendent of the Chicago Public Schools and a charter school proponent. And there's going to be a lot of federal money available for charter schools. And if you don't have a law, then you're not going to have access to that money, which, you know, is a shame, because the majority of the states have laws that provide for charter schools. I had the opportunity to go to the KIPP school, which is just one nonprofit that operates this school in West Helena, Arkansas, where Arkansas passed a charter school law 2 or 3 years ago. And the Senate bill that we passed is modeled after that. And the KIPP school is a college preparatory school. The children that choose to go there want to go to college. And I have to tell you, I was very impressed with it. And their graduating class will not graduate until next year. But I think it's made a difference in those children's lives. Now, the gentleman said that the charter school is the answer to discipline. I don't think that's the key. I mean, certainly you want to have discipline in the charter schools, but that's in the K through 12 public schools as well, and charter schools are public schools. That's something people lose sight of. You could actually have a public school. Chastain can be a charter school within the public school. So it's people's, I think, perceptions about what a charter school is. Maybe early on they were misled about what it did, but it gives the local school district an opportunity to try something different. And there's some school districts we need to try something different because it's not working, and it's a disservice to those children because they're not getting as good education as they may be able to get otherwise.
Let's bring another call into this actually right now. Dan from Columbus, go ahead with your question.
Yes, the president last night spoke about the need for more people to attend college. Now, there were a lot of cuts that were imposed by the governor this year on our state universities and community colleges. So, in your opinion, are you going to pass legislation that will allow the governor to replace those cuts with some of the stimulus money? And in addition to the cuts that the institutions receive, students who had MTAG awards are possibly going to lose a portion of their MTAG grant this semester because of the 5% cutback.
And thanks for the call. Dan is concerned about higher education. What has the House been looking at in this regard? Is stimulus possibly going to play into this issue also?
Yes. The governor, when the governor came to visit the other day, he specifically mentioned the MTAG program, that he wants to restore those cuts. And let me say this, the restoration of the cuts, as I understand it, if we pass a bill that allow it's up to him as to how much he wants to restore and which programs he wants to restore. We don't have any control over that. We simply have the ability to give him the authority to do that. Now, from the House perspective, we'd like for him to restore all the cuts in education. I mean, that's something that we push for. We have passed bill after bill after bill to fund education, and the Senate has too. We'd like for him to restore the cuts to IHL, and that'd be what we would like to have happen, and I suspect that'll be the bill we will pass. Whether he does that or not, he mentioned that there's some programs that he would not want to restore. He did not specify which of those they would be, but there were some education programs that he thought should take cuts. So,
Representative Buck, I think this touches on a committee you're on, isn't it?
It does, and what I would say in response to the gentleman's question is that, once again, the stimulus package will only serve us for a couple of years. And whatever policy we make, whatever changes we make to policy, need to take that into consideration. That we have to, whatever we do, we're going to have to be able to sustain that after the stimulus package is done. With that said, there was parts of the stimulus package that addressed directly the students and Pell Grants and things of this nature, and that would give students more money, to be able and make more students eligible for these kind of grants. And so our committee is simply, we were supposed to, in fact, have a hearing today with IHL to give us some of the updates as to the specifics of the stimulus package and what impact it would have on our universities and colleges, and in particular what how students could benefit directly from it. And so we're still waiting to get some more information. There's still a lot of things unclear about exactly how that will be broken down, but we certainly look at opportunities to try to work with the governor and come up with some solutions.
And in the Senate, I know you're also both looking into this issue as more information comes on the stimulus package. Is it a possibility higher education could be affected by this?
Yeah, absolutely, and I hope, I think there were about $16 million in cuts for community colleges and universities, and being from Oxford, University of Mississippi, is frustrating, and this is not the first year that the universities and colleges have been shortchanged, because what happens is they say, oh, they can always raise tuition, and so they put it on the backs of the parents and the students through financial aid, every year, and at some point we've got to stop, because what happens is the college boards are going to go raise tuition 5 to 10%, and they'll have to, because you got to have professors to teach in the classrooms. I mean, so at some point the classes are going to get so large you're not going to be able to fit them into the rooms. So it's a continual problem, and I wish we wouldn't rely on tuition, because what you're going to do is price students out of being able to afford college, even in Mississippi, and that's not a good thing.
The danger of the stimulus package, as Representative Buck said, there's some language in the stimulus package that says you can use some of the stimulus money for higher education in lieu of tuition. And that sounds great, except as Representative Buck says, well, what happens after 3 years? I mean, are they going to jump 15% in tuition because we no longer? So we've got to be planning today and putting money aside and looking at things like the tobacco tax and other sources of funding for universities and colleges 2 years, 3 years from now, because this stimulus money is going to go away, and we're going to be left holding the bag with not enough money to put universities and colleges back where they are today.
We've actually got an email on the cigarette tax issue. We've got Luke, who asks, are the conferees taking into account the federal cigarette tax increase that was passed as part of the S-chip legislation that passed earlier this year in Washington? Senator Tollison, that might be something your committee deals with.
Right. I think it was 61 cents. And yes,
I believe that's correct.
We are
61
aware
cents.
of that, and I think that certainly has been taken into consideration and will be once they hopefully reach a final resolution and get a conference report filed.
One thing I wanted to add too, the state, we don't make money. We take money, so to speak. So the money that we take from our citizens in the form of whatever tax there is, the revenue that we bring in, we've got to be real good stewards of that money. And there's no doubt that we have made education priority, whether it's K-12, whether it's community and junior colleges or IHL. Unfortunately, I can't always afford what I want in my household. So unfortunately, the state, we can't always afford what we would like to have out there. And I go along with my friends here on the panel that we need to be real good stewards, but we need to make sure that dollar that we do give them, that it's being spent wisely. And I want to go back, if you don't mind, to we talked not just on charters, but we talked a little bit about discipline, the caller did. And to me, it goes back to our children's first act, the leadership. The leadership, and then it goes to that community, and the word that we always hear and that I think we need to put a little more emphasis on is the expectations. What do you expect from your school or from your community college or from your community as far as that goes? So if your expectations are at this level, I think you're going to see a rise in test scores, a rise in attitudes, and all of those things. And I think sometimes, and I'm speaking to myself, that become complacent on what's going on around us. And the focus that we're trying to do in education, and all of us are in one way or another tied to education, that when we look at those children, we will say, okay, we put you first. Now, we might not have, everything might not have been perfect, but you were the first thing on our mind when we did this budget or when we passed this piece of legislation, because one of these days you could be sitting where we are and you're controlling what we may or may not be able to do as citizens.
Let's bring another caller into this. Harold from Louisville, go ahead with your question.
My question is directed to the House members. We talk about funding for schools, and of course one of the sources of funds for schools are 16th section funds that can only be used for infrastructure, but it does replace general funds that would have to be used otherwise. Why did the House pass House Bill 881, which puts a cap on the increase in the lease revenue that can be charged upon the end of the lease and renewal, and especially since the author of the bill has two 16-section leases of his own, so he's authoring legislation for his own benefit.
Thank you for the call, Harold. What are some of the things that the House members have been looking at with 16-section land?
Well, we have two bills on 16-section land this year. One is, as the caller mentioned, was a bill that would allow a leaseholder of 16-section land, agricultural land, if the land was going to be reclassified as some other purpose, to extend his lease for 5 years with a 20% increase in the lease payments. That's a bill that's already in place. We did that 5 years ago, I think. This would extend that process. I think you're going to see that bill amended on the Senate side if they take it up at all. There'll be an amendment over there, and we're talking about some amendments on the House side. It has not gotten all the way through the process. The other bill we dealt with had to do with the management of the 16-section land for timber purposes, which would allow school boards to contract out if they wanted a second opinion, if you will. The Forestry Commission now has the primary responsibility for management of timberlands on 16-section land, but if a school board wanted a second opinion, they could contract out with an independent forester and get another plan. So we're dealing with that. Neither one of those bills has gone all the way through the process, but we're certainly, and I know the Secretary of State spent a lot of time on 16-section land issues this year, so we're talking with him and looking at what our options are.
And for you two in the Senate, are you considering any 16-section land bills? And also, maybe just to back up a little bit, for someone who's not familiar, what is this?
Well, this is the 16th sections of property in each county set aside for school purposes. Simply, in very simple terms, that's what it is. And yes and no to your questions. One of the bills that Chairman Brown was talking about is one that we sent over to them, and this is the one where the school districts can go out and find a private forester to help them manage their timber, but it still has to be approved by the forester. Now, what this will do, hopefully, is several different things. Our foresters are so stretched out on what they have to go look after and having to look after all the 16th section land plus other responsibilities that they have. It will give the district a chance to get, as he said, a second opinion. And if they would agree with it, surely they maybe make a little more money out of that. Now, the bill that the caller talked about, yes, we're going to look at it, as a matter of fact, in the morning at the Senate Education Committee. And, yes, there will be an amendment coming forth. I just don't have it in my head exactly how it's worded right now. But I think that he would be pleased with the outcome of that.
Let's take another caller. James from Senatobia. Go ahead with your question.
Yes, gentlemen. With budget shortfall this year and everything, is it time to revisit the way that we manage these schools and management with 152 different districts out there and only 82 counties, and how do other states handle their business when it comes to education and when it comes to transportation costs and other states that have rural transport issues? How do other states handle their transport issues? Can they go in there and book their fuel for the year? Is there any other way to keep these fuel costs from catching us again?
Thanks for your call, James. James is, I think, maybe touching on the issue of school consolidation, but also how do we deal with some of these costs in the school districts?
Well, James has raised a very important issue. We have, Senator Carmichael and I have co-chaired a committee, a task force last year that dealt with low-performing schools. We both have a bill that would extend that task force and add the issue of consolidation of school districts into the study that we're going to be looking at. So we've got some public sector, private sector people. We're going to be looking at the whole issue of school consolidation. I will say that when we looked a couple of years ago at the whole issue of MAEP and how that formula is constructed, we had some testimony from experts outside the state of Mississippi who look at districts all across the United States that actually our average size of our school district is larger than the average school district in the United States. If you take a state like Kansas, we have 151 or 152 school districts, depending on how you count the agricultural schools. Kansas has 222. There are many, many states out there that have districts that are much smaller than we have. We have districts ranging inside from like Jackson with 30,000 students and DeSoto County with 30,000 students to some of the districts that have fewer than 1,000 students. So they're all over the board. We're going to be looking at that, and you know, the issue of transportation is tough. We have, unless things have changed that I don't know about, we still have school kids that are riding 4 hours a day on school buses to get to school. That's pretty tough. You take a 6, 7, 8-year-old kid and they're riding 4 hours a day on a school bus. They're tired, they're hungry, and they don't have time to do their homework. So it's just an issue in a rural state.
And what is the Senate looking at in the school consolidation issue?
Well, it goes back to what Chairman Brown was talking about. If we can extend the education task force that was studying underperforming schools, that will be another issue that we look at over the next, when we're out of session this time. Going back again to the Children's First Act, that all of these recommendations came out of that task force. So we're trying to go look at school districts and see what we need to do. Again, I'd rather leave it up to the locals, but if whatever we can do as a legislature to help these districts, we need to find it out. And some of the things that came, or all of the recommendations through the task force helped us with what we're doing now with Children's First Act. Consolidation, I know, is a piece that we need to look at, and several other issues that hopefully we'll be looking at over the next fall.
We've got actually a Twitter question that touches on this. Is there a reason to believe educational quality would increase if hierarchy of school districts and principals were reduced? Senator Tollison, I'd like to get your thoughts on that.
If the principals were reduced, I know.
If the hierarchy of school districts and principals were reduced, touching on the consolidation issue, if we reduce maybe some of the administration.
I don't think that has an impact on it. I think ultimately they're talked about leadership, and you need good administrators, but ultimately you need a good teacher in the classroom. And if you have a good teacher, as there was an article about this, that I would rather have a good teacher teaching my child in a bad school district than a bad teacher in a good school district. And that's ultimately what it is. And we have to do everything we can to make sure we have good teachers in the classroom. That'll make all the difference. Whether it's pay, making sure they have a good environment by making sure the discipline is there, but they have the resources. There's some schools around here that don't have textbooks for their children. There are schools up in North Mississippi, they don't have lab equipment for the biology class. We've got to provide those resources. If I'm a teacher and I go in to teach biology and I don't have lab equipment, I don't want to teach in that school district. I'm going to go somewhere else where they do have that. So we have to provide the resources and make sure we have the best teachers. But, you know, the infrastructure, I don't think that makes that much of a difference. Ultimately, your savings in any type of consolidation would be on a county level with ad valorem taxes. In Bolivar County, I mean, that's the one everybody talks about, 6 school districts. You have 6 different school superintendents. They're all making $70,000+. Well, if you had one superintendent, there would be only one making $70,000+. 6 different bus supervisors. I don't know. I assume that's what they have. 6 different cafeteria. You know, so the savings on the local level at ad valorem, and that's up to the counties and the school districts to decide whether they want to do that or not and maintain that type of structure.
We've got some touch on something that we talked about a little bit earlier today. Governor Barbour has said he'll turn down around $50 million in stimulus money for unemployment payments. Let's hear what he had to say today about that in a press conference.
The upshot of that is when the federal money runs out, we'd have to have a tax increase on our employers. The best estimates right now are $11 to $13 million tax increase. However, nobody knows how many people would come out of the woodwork and say, I'd be willing to work part-time if you'd let me get unemployment. We're trying to create more jobs. This is a tax on job creation. This is a direct tax on job creation because the unemployment insurance benefit is paid with one tax, and that's the unemployment insurance tax, which is a tax that employers pay as a percentage of the income of every employee. So this is a tax on job creation, and we're trying to have more jobs, not less jobs. And I don't know of any economist in the world that says if you're trying to create more jobs, the way to do it is to increase the tax on creating jobs.
There's the governor talking about his decision to turn down around $50 million in stimulus money that deals with unemployment. For you two in the House, what have you been hearing from House members about this?
Well, I don't even know where to start on this. The governor has absolutely jumped the gun on this. In the first place, we don't even know what they mean by part-time employment. The regulations, part-time employment will be defined by the Department of Labor, so we don't know what that means. The second thing is the $50 million, if it goes in the unemployment fund now, will prevent a tax increase. Because if we continue to drain the unemployment fund as a result of unemployment in the state because of the recession, taxes on employers will go up. In addition to that, we're talking about 2 or 3 years down the road when he doesn't have a clue what the employment situation will be in this state. And neither do I, and neither does anybody out there listening. So to say that we're going to have a $13 million tax increase on employers is just, I don't know how he comes up with that. I'd like to see the numbers, but I'm astounded that the governor of this state would say we're going to turn down $50 million in money for unemployment benefits for hardworking people who have lost their jobs. Remember, you got to lose a job to get unemployment benefits. You got to lose a job. These aren't people out there that are just on the dole. These are people that have lost their jobs to get unemployment benefits. How in the world we can talk about that? I don't have a clue. I'm just astounded at that. In addition to that, I would point out, as far as I know, there are only 4 governors in the nation that have said that. That means that 46 governors are wrong and our governor's right.
And Senator Carmichael, what have you been hearing from Republican members of the Senate about this issue?
I really haven't heard very much, and that could be a lot my fault because my focus has been more on what we're doing in our educational issues.
What's
the
your
governor
reaction
has more. He has more information than I do, so it'd be hard for me to comment on that. Other than he has people that that's what he's been doing, where I've been doing something else. So until I know more, it's hard for me to make a comment one way or another.
But would you like to see Mississippi get that money?
I always like to see money. Who wouldn't like to see money? But again, from what little, that's the first time I saw that excerpt. As I go back to what I said earlier, we don't make money, we take money. So if we take that money and it's going to take more down the road, are we really winning? But again, I'm making a comment about something I don't really know enough about at this point.
And Representative Buck, go ahead.
Well, you know what? Here's the deal on this. A few years ago, we actually reduced the unemployment securities tax. We reduced that tax. And that gave a break that was very much necessary. And also in that process, there's a cap as it relates to how low that fund can go, I do believe. And I think it's like 500 or something like that in terms of that fund. But again, the people that would be recipients of these dollars are people who were not unemployed people. These were people that were working on a job and a factory or an industry closed down, and all of a sudden they're left with the responsibility of providing for their family with whatever the resources that they might be able to get. Right now, our method of trying to help them is the employment securities tax. And so it's not like these are people that are just standing around and not wanting to work. They were working. It's just unfortunate that our economy has not been able to sustain the jobs. I know many people who are working part-time jobs, by the way, 2 and 3 to try to make ends meet. So again, this goes back to the point that my colleague was making, that we really don't know all the details enough to make such strong statements about whether or not we should take it. But I will say this, I don't think it's any reason why the state of Mississippi, one of the poorest states in the union, would turn down $50 million from the federal government. I just don't understand.
And one of the highest unemployment rates.
And one of the,
we have nearly 300,000 people right now, and probably more unemployed right now. So I think it's a little premature to make bold statements like that.
And another thing that touches on this issue, members of the legislature could override the governor or bypass him with a resolution to accept the funding. For you two in the Senate, do you see that as a possibility in the Senate? I know the lieutenant governor has come out against doing that.
I think anything's a possibility when you talk about the legislature. And, I feel like sometimes I need to defend the governor, but he's a big boy. He can defend himself. And I'll go back to what I said earlier. He knows more about this situation than I do at this point. So, and I trust his judgment up to this point. I really do. So I just have to sit back and see what happens.
Well, and I think we need to look at the practical effect of this, and Representative Brown hit on it. There's some states out there, like Ohio, they're drained of their unemployment fund. And if we run out of money, we're going to have to raise the tax. So, yeah, would I rather take $50 million instead of starting to raise the tax today and possibly maybe or maybe not raising in 3 years? Yes. So I hope that we would sit down and put the political rhetoric aside, because this is a serious problem we're in right now. I mean, we're not out of this recession, and we're not going to be out of it this year or probably next year. And the political rhetoric ought to go to the side, and then let's look at this and look at the facts, and then decide what we need to do.
Well, that's basically what I was saying, and again, that's the first time I've seen that. And if the governor's correct, this is going to hurt the one who owns a business of providing those jobs. Are we winning or losing? If we don't have the person out there with the business that provides the job, if it's going to hurt them down the road, is that the solution? I don't know, again, and I apologize to everyone listening here because I don't know enough about this subject other than just what I've just seen there.
We're running a little short on time, but for you two in the House, is the possibility of trying to go around the governor a possibility in the House?
Yes.
Well, you could be a little more expanding than that.
Well, it takes a concurrent resolution, and I think you'll see that. We don't know what the governor's going to do. I mean, we know what he said, and we don't know what other funds he may or may not decide to take. We're not quite sure how the process works.
We'll have to touch on that later because that's all the time we have for tonight's program. I'd like to thank our guests, Senators Videt, Carmichael, and Gray Tollison, and Representatives Cecil Brown and Kelvin Buck. We also thank you for joining our discussion tonight. We invite you to tune in next week at 7 for Quorum. Also, tonight's program will be available for viewing on our website beginning tomorrow. That address is mpbonline.org. I'm Stephen Caranda. Good night.